I spend so much time there, and they have confirmed to me that FBI teams have been back in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood in the last couple of weeks, and they know who they are because several of the neighbors, have done interviews with the FBI. The same agents have come to their house several times to talk to them, so they know kind of who they're looking for. They know who these people are. They know that it's the same agents who were out there initially. And what's interesting is I'm told that the FBI agents were in an area kind of behind Nancy's house. And if you look at Google Earth here, you can see what I'm talking about. There's almost like I don't want to call it an alley, but that's kind of the first word that comes to mind. But there's like a dirt sort of driveway, but it's like a public, it's kind of like an alley that goes in an area sort of in the vicinity of the land behind Nancy's house. And one of the neighbors was telling me that she saw an FBI agent back in that area.
The FBI didn't find what they were looking for the first time. So they came back. And this time, they went straight to the one place nobody was supposed to be looking. I've spent more time in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood over these last 6 months than I have in some places I've actually lived. I've walked that street at dawn, at noon, after dark. I've stood in front of her house, and I've stood behind it, on a neighbor's property with permission, just trying to understand what someone would have seen, what someone would have needed to know, and what someone would have had to risk to do what was done to that 84-year-old woman. And I'll tell you something I haven't said on this show before. For a while, I thought the back of that house was a dead end. Literally and figuratively. I walked it. I filmed it. I showed it to you. And I walked away thinking, nobody came through there. It was too dark, too thick with cactus, too easy to get hurt, too hard to move someone through quickly and quietly. I said as much on this channel. And I was wrong. Not wrong about the terrain. The terrain is exactly what I showed you, but wrong about what it meant. Because the FBI didn't walk away thinking what I thought. The FBI came back. Multiple agents, confirmed by neighbors who recognized them from the initial interviews, back in that same area behind Nancy's house within the last 2 weeks. And that changes everything about how we have to think about this case. Let me be specific about where they were. It wasn't just somewhere in the general vicinity. It was on that dirt access road that runs behind the houses, the one that isn't quite an alley, but isn't quite not. The one that connects to those little pathways the neighborhood kids used to use to sneak between houses. The one that, if you knew about it, if you had walked it before, if you understood how the properties backed up against each other, and where the sightlines broke and where the darkness pooled deepest at night, would let you approach Nancy Guthrie's house from a direction nobody was watching.
There's a lot of open land behind her house, and it's kind of hard to describe unless you see it. I'm going to put some of this video up from when I was walking around back there, but you can walk around back there. I mean, it's a little treacherous because there's a lot of cactuses and there's rocks, but you can walk in between them and kind of get around. And even some of the neighbors have said to me that, when their kids were young, they would like all run around back there and sneak around back there and get to each other's houses kind of through these back little pathways. It would be difficult at night. It's very, very dark, but it is interesting that it seems the FBI is once again looking and interested in that area behind Nancy's house. One of the reasons I'm told could be because of the monsoons. There's been a lot of rain there this time of year. There's like little waterways that form this time of year that are not there at other times when it's not the rainy season. And so evidence could have been moved around, that kind of thing. I'm told.
The neighbors told me something else. The agents weren't just standing around. They were looking at the ground. They were looking at the waterways. Because this is monsoon season in Tucson. And if you've never been there during monsoon season, you need to understand what that means. The rain comes hard and fast. It cuts channels through the dirt. It moves things. It carries things. Evidence that was buried 6 months ago. evidence that was trapped under rock or wedged into the root structure of a cactus, evidence that every initial search missed because the ground was dry and hard and unyielding. That evidence might not be where it started. And retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, who you've seen on this show many times, who spent decades working crime scenes and evidence collection, explained something to me that I hadn't considered. Water doesn't scatter evidence randomly. It follows predictable paths. It creates what she called choke points, areas where everything flowing in a certain direction gets pulled together and deposited. If you know what you're looking for, and if you understand the topography, and if you know where the water goes when it rains, you can stand in one spot and have everything the ground has been hiding delivered right to your feet.
And also the monsoons. I was back in Tucson like a week ago, and there were like thunderstorms. Was it different than when I had been there last time? They have like thunderstorms in the summer and really, really heavy rains. When you're looking for evidence, I mean, could that impact things? Could that be a reason that they're going back out there?
Yeah, because water flows, downhill or in a relatively typical or in a way that you can anticipate. And there's often a choke point or an area where all that water will pool. It's a good place to go and look for evidence, especially if they're looking for clothing, if they knew what she was wearing or anything like that. So if it was a pink nightgown and they find a pink piece of cloth, it's worth looking into. It will also take a very vast area, and the water will cause whatever is on top to wash in one direction. That's basically what I was trying to say earlier. But so it is a good place. By a choke point, I mean it's an area where things come together. You can have a choke point when it comes to traffic. Like, for example, going in and out of Nancy's house, there's really only two choke points that, if you were to sit on surveillance or you'd be looking at those cameras, you'd be looking at these two different areas, that type of thing. So the evidence could be rolling in one direction, and that could be very beneficial to the team.
Here's what that tells me. The FBI is looking for something specific, something small enough to have been missed in the initial searches, but significant enough to bring agents back to the same location 6 months later. Something that monsoon water might have uncovered or moved. Clothing. A personal item. Something that belonged to Nancy Guthrie or something that belonged to whoever took her. And the fact that they're looking behind the house, in that specific area, tells me something else. They believe whoever did this exited through the back, or entered through the back, or both.
That's one of the reasons they may have been looking back there. There's also the possibility that they think whoever did this may have left through the back. We know those back doors were propped open from what we've been told. So before I get to my conversation with Maureen.
Now, I want you to think about what that requires. Because when I stood back there, even in broad daylight, I had to watch every step. The ground is uneven. The cactus is everywhere. Everything has thorns. Everything wants to catch you. At night, with no moon, with no streetlights reaching that far back, it would be nearly impossible to navigate unless you already knew the way. Unless you had walked it before. Unless you had practiced.
Yesterday to one of the neighbors who lives nearby, and I've seen some other reporting about this, that FBI agents were back out there again, and she knew for sure that it was FBI because she actually recognized one of the guys who came to her door to talk to her within the last couple of weeks. And she said they were specifically looking around. There's a kind of like, I don't know what the right word, it's not an alley, but there's a kind of like a dirt road that goes back in an area behind Nancy's house in between two houses. And that she saw them specifically on that road. What should we make of that?
Well, it sounds like they're going over everything again with a fresh set of eyes, which is really important. It's good to do. It's going to be helpful. They may have something in mind where they're trying to check out or verify whether or not what the reporting party said could have happened back there. And And it's also really good to familiarize yourself completely with the area that surrounds a crime scene like this, because when you're going over stuff and you're reading older reports or reports that were completed in the past, if you have a really solid understanding of what the topography looks like, what the area is like, how high the pony walls are, or is it a 6-foot wall, so that if someone tells you or someone has said in a statement that, oh yeah, we walked over there, stepped over the back wall and walked right in, you can stand back there as you did yourself on your podcast, I remember. And I think you even said, this wall is not as high as I thought it was. But you also came up with all kinds of good information.
And then there's the screen door. I was told by someone with direct knowledge that the screen door on the back patio, the one on the side of the outdoor area, that screen was propped open. Savannah said in her interview that doors, plural, were propped open. The potted plants that were moved to hold them open. Someone wanted those back doors open. Someone wanted a path that didn't require forcing anything, didn't require breaking glass, didn't require making the kind of noise that neighbors might hear. And someone knew that path existed. Which means someone had been back there before. What I'm describing to you is not a crime of opportunity. It's not random. It's not someone driving through the neighborhood looking for an easy target and picking Nancy's house because the light was off. It's someone who knew the house, knew the back access, knew which door would be open or could be made open, knew that Nancy was 84 years old, on blood thinners, living alone in a house she'd been in since the 1970s. And here's where I need you to help me think through something, because I've gone back and forth on this and I genuinely want to know what you see that I might be missing. The FBI profile that the sheriff's office released at the 6-month mark. The one that looked almost exactly like what retired FBI profiler Jim Fitzgerald had been saying on this show months earlier, asked people to look for someone who changed their appearance after Nancy disappeared, someone who left town unexpectedly, someone who was either talking about the case constantly or specifically avoiding any mention of it. Those are behavioral indicators. They're useful. But they're also broad. What I want to know is this. Do you believe the person who did this knew Nancy personally? Meaning they had been inside that house, they had met her, they had some relationship with her or with her family? Or do you believe this was someone who studied the house from the outside, who learned the patterns, who watched and waited and planned without ever having a conversation with the woman they were planning to take? Because the back access tells me one thing. The propped doors tell me another. And I'm not sure they tell the same story. Here's what I can tell you. The FBI knows more than they're saying. I believe that with certainty. Maureen and I talked about this at length. She told me, and I'm going to paraphrase, that law enforcement today, especially the FBI, does not name persons of interest casually. They don't hold press conferences to update you on their theories. They build cases. Quietly. Methodically.
The perpetrator or perpetrators are, but without enough evidence to actually put them away, you have to keep your mouth shut about it. You can't run your mouth. Those days are gone.
What do you mean by run your mouth?
I mean, as a law enforcement agency, you can't say so-and-so is a person of interest and we think that this is the case for the following reasons. You're just going to get sued. Podcasters are going to get sued, so everyone is really, really cautious, even though there may be a pretty solid general consensus as to who it is. But then again, we've seen all these cases where, like that Chandra Levy case, they thought it was the congressman for a long, long time. And then they realized it was this other offender that was in the park doing very similar things to other women.
And they keep information close to the vest, not because they don't care about the family's need for answers, but because the integrity of the investigation depends on it. She said something that stuck with me. The person we're working for is the victim. Everything else, including the family's understandable desperation for information, has to be balanced against that. They will tell the family what they can. They will keep secret what they must. And if they are back in that neighborhood 6 months later, searching the same ground under different conditions, it's not because they're starting over. It's because they're closing in on something specific. Something they need to find before they can move. And that brings me to what I think is the hardest part of this case to reconcile. The crime scene. Not the crime scene as it exists now. The crime scene as it was processed in the first hours and days. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, because it matters more now than it did then. The initial responding deputies saw blood. A significant amount of blood. And according to the Wall Street Journal, they initially thought it was old blood.
Is the Wall Street Journal reported that initially the deputies who responded thought that it was old blood, like thought that Nancy had had a nosebleed, and that it was like dry blood and that it had nothing to do with her disappearance, that it was like from another event, an innocent event. I don't know why that really stuck with me, because it was so much blood. Like, I guess I'm just trying to get into the mind of an investigator. If you showed up out there, wouldn't you have thought that it was like something that may have had to do with her being gone?
Well, when you consider that they haven't had any kidnappings or murders in a very, very, very long time, and I think whatever that number was, over 90% of calls like this end up being someone that just walked off, especially when she's an elderly person. But once the other stuff started coming together, so I could see initially that they would be like, this could be something else, because with all that cacti around her, she could easily get cut. She was on blood thinners. You can bleed like you can't believe when you're in that type of situation. However, when you start adding together the other things that were unfolding in real time, like the information from the family, if in fact the family told her, I mean, we heard Savannah say that her mom could barely make it to the down to the mailbox, but are we sure that Tommaso and Annie said that to the police? If they said that to the police, and that's in their written statements, and that's something that will hopefully eventually come out, then yeah, now it's starting to build. Then you get to the back door, and then you see the 2 potted plants and the doors propped open. Now it's to every ratchet this up one notch. Then her car's there. Then you see that her Apple Watch is at the end of the bed, and you know, her bed isn't made. Does she often leave the house without making her bed? The answer is no. So you see these things just start to build and build and build. And it should have happened in relatively quick succession that they said, you know what, something's going on here. At that point, they should have put up the yellow tape in a very large area.
A nosebleed. Something unrelated. Something innocent. They didn't lock down the street. They didn't put up crime scene tape in a wide perimeter. They didn't treat the driveway like a place where tire impressions and shoe impressions needed to be preserved. By the time the FBI was brought in, days had passed. People had walked on that driveway. Cars had driven over it. The scene had been compromised in ways that can't be undone. Maureen walked me through what should have happened.
Now more than 6 months later, where things feel like they're at a bit of a standstill, goes back to mistakes made with the crime scene and the way that it was processed before the FBI. Because, you know, you've heard Kash Patel bring up that they didn't come in for days. I mean, do these issues now all go back to the way it was processed initially?
Possibly. I mean, the crime scene, if it was an FBI case initially, and we saw that she was likely removed from the front of that house, but intended to go out the back of the house, those pots would have been gone, that door handles would have probably been gone, that mat would have 100% been gone. Our crime scene yellow tape would have been, the street would have been blocked off because we would be looking for tire impressions and shoe impressions, even though the original deputies pulled up because they thought it was a walkaway. As I said, over 90% of these cases are, well over 90, I would guess. And you can still work. If you had one or two cars up there, you could still at this point say, whoa, 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 let's hold the phone, tell our guys, get traffic control, our traffic guys out here, cut off this street, put up the crime scene tape. They all have crime scene tape rolls in their trunk. Everybody does. Most people do. And just lock that whole area down. That circle drive in front should have not been accessible. There should not have been cars on that. There should not have been more cars. You could leave the ones that were there for now, until you do a thorough examination of the entire driveway all the way back to the casita. You're looking for shoe impressions in the dirt or in the sand or the soil or whatever that substrate is that you have. You're looking very closely, and I mean very closely, with oblique lighting and everything else, trying to find any shoe impressions, tire impressions, any evidence that people were walking around, any crushed grass below any window on the entire circumference of the residence. You're looking for any broken glass, which I'm sure the initial deputies did, but this all has to be done by the crime scene team. And when they get there, when the crime scene team shows up, we generally get briefed by whoever the detective is or the lead person on scene, and they'll say, hey, you know what, on the north side of the building, we saw something that looks like someone had been standing in this area for a while. Go look and see if you find a cigarette butt, or not that many people smoke anymore, but I still see people smoking a lot. So that's my thought on that.
The street blocked off. The entire circular drive treated as evidence. The area behind the house sealed and searched with oblique lighting for any sign of disturbance. An access path created on the side of the property, least likely to hold evidence so investigators could move in and out without contaminating anything.
You know, we've talked before about how hard it is to collapse a scene, and that's why you want it bigger initially. You can always make it smaller as you go on, as days go by. But the other thing you want to do is to create an access and egress pathway that's opposite or in an area where we're not looking for shoe impressions, we're not looking for tire impressions. So it would be like if you're standing out on the street like you did for so long and you're looking at Nancy's house, and here's the driveway with the casita on the right, and here's the circle drive right in front of you. What I would have done as the team leader is we would have created a path on the left side of the property and walk almost up the property line into a place where we deemed was least likely to be part of the crime scene.
Yeah, and the FBI did do that, but it was just days and days later after it had been opened back up. I remember seeing them do that thing where they all walked in a straight line. It just wasn't right away, you know? It was after people had been allowed to walk on the driveway and come back in.
And because that didn't happen, because the initial response treated this like a missing elderly person who had probably wandered off, evidence was lost. Not necessarily destroyed, but lost in the sense that it's harder to find now, which is exactly why the FBI is back there digging through monsoon channels. Now, I want to address something that I know a lot of you are thinking because I've gotten the emails. Is this case going cold? Is the 6-month mark with no arrest, no named suspect, no public breakthrough a sign that this is fading into the unsolved file? I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. The FBI doesn't send agents back to search a location they've already searched unless they have a reason. They don't cycle in new detectives with fresh eyes unless they believe fresh eyes will see something the old eyes missed. They don't release a behavioral profile to the public unless they believe the public knows the person they're looking for. These are not the actions of an investigation that's winding down.
We're also hearing now that there's some new people coming into the investigation, new detectives being cycled in, a fresh set of eyes. You and I were texting about that the other day. Is that important? I mean, when you're working on an investigation, and from what I've been told, unfortunately, they really and they've made progress because they're going through the tips, but I don't think they're right now any closer to a specific person or anything like that. Can that be helpful when you get just someone brand new that comes in with a fresh set of eyes, or can that be frustrating if you're already working on the case because it's someone who doesn't know anything?
Both, but the fact of the matter is, like, even in the FBI, probably especially in the FBI, because we rotate around a lot. So you end up, when a person rotates off your squad, they divvy up those cases amongst the other investigators on that squad. So you'll end up with an old case. You always have at least one old, what we would call like an old dog, where this case, and it wouldn't be something like this. I think something like this is unique in that your whole office potentially could be focused on this. Could be trying to help with this. So could it be frustrating? Yes. Is it good to have a new set of eyes? Yes, because new people have new skill sets. You might be a guy that's really good at electronics. You might be someone that's unbelievable at, like, if you work narcotics and stuff, like some of these detectives have. These narcotics guys are scrappers. I worked narcotics for many, many years here in Los Angeles. They're some of the most resourceful detectives you can find, and they are dogged detectives. So if you get a guy like that who's got street smarts, street savvy, he's a scrapper, he's a go-getter, he's a honey badger. I mean, and then you put him with someone that's just a technological genius, God only knows what you're going to come up with, but hopefully it's...
These are the actions of an investigation that's building something. Methodically. Carefully. The way they're supposed to. Here's what I want to leave you with, and it's the same thing I've felt since the first time I stood in front of Nancy Guthrie's house and looked at that beautiful home where she lived for 50 years and raised a daughter and built a life. Someone knows. Someone out there watched someone they know change their appearance, or leave town, or start acting strangely around conversations about this case. Someone saw something and explained it away. Someone heard something and didn't want to believe what it meant. And all it takes is one person to stop explaining it away. One person to pick up the phone. One tip. That's it. That's what breaks cases like this open.
New developments. I'm still hoping, as I said with Maureen, that this 6-month mark will sort of revitalize some interest in the case, that perhaps someone who knows something will be urged to come forward, will feel like it's the right thing, because all it takes is really one tip to break this thing wide open. And I'm hoping that will happen soon, especially for Savannah and her family. So if anyone has any information, as always, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. I'm going to be on the road this week working on a couple of other stories, a couple of interesting ones I've been looking into, but I've been talking to my sources constantly when it comes to Nancy's case, and I'm obviously not sometimes I get emails from you guys like, please don't move on, like, stay on it, and I am staying on, even though I don't do episodes every day. Trust me, the way I kind of work is I check in with my people every day or every other day just to see if there's anything new, make sure I'm not missing anything. So if anything happens...
I'm not going anywhere. I check in with my sources constantly, even on days when I'm not posting. If something breaks, you'll hear it here. I promise you that. If you have information, call the FBI. The number is on your screen, and if you've been following this case as closely as I have, if you've noticed something that I haven't talked about, something that doesn't sit right with you, I want you to tell me. Because sometimes the thing that everyone else overlooked is the thing that matters most. I'll talk to you soon.